Hi, André.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Great. We greatly appreciate your leadership. At Setsi, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation, and we acknowledge all of the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please tell me about the origins of your work in the fundraising ecosystem in Canada and how you work towards disrupting the ecosystems.
Well, like most things in life, I stumbled into fundraising as a career. And it ended up being a 20-plus year career of working with not-for-profits, largely with colleges, with universities at the director and the vice president levels. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful journey, because in fundraising, you get to work, first of all, with philanthropists,
right?
People who give yet don't have to give. They want to make a difference in the world. And that difference for them could be healthcare. It could be building community centers. It could be helping Black entrepreneurs. It could be a number of things, but they all have their way of changing the world. Then you get to work with subject matter experts. Those are the ones that are proposing how to change the world.
Right.
And you're constantly a student of those people. And I've been so fortunate to learn from those people. And then last, but definitely not least, you get to work with the people who are impacted by that generosity. And just as a small example, a lot of the funds that were raised between my colleagues and myself were for scholarships and bursaries.
Okay.
Well, when you have a first generation student that gets a scholarship or a bursary, the first one in their family to be able to attend post-secondary, it gives me shivers just talking about it, because that's going to impact many lives, not just their life. So it's a wonderful profession, and now I do it as a consultant, but I thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm delighted to chat with you about it today.
Absolutely. So can you articulate your personal mission and vision in your fundraising work here? I know you spoke about how it makes you feel really great being able to support, scholars or individuals going to school. I'd love to hear about your personal mission and vision.
Well, fundraising comes down to one thing. It's an alignment of values and priorities. So whatever you're raising funds for, it's when you find people that share those values, that share those priorities, that really amazing things can happen. So, but I've been fortunate that I've been on the front line of how that impacts people's lives. And that's the exciting part about fundraising, is to see that impact, that change. And I'll even add, that accountability, because when donors give money, they want to see that change. And it's important for us as fundraisers to keep them informed, to keep them engaged, and to bridge those relationships between them and those they impact. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So how important is the fundraising sector in Canada?
Well, it's hugely important, because after government, you have basically a big gap to make a lot of things move forward in the country. Whether we're looking at healthcare, education, childcare, those are three very big ones. But philanthropy has a role in each of those. When you look at the community level, the communities that we live in, access to services, access to supports, access to spaces for children to play and to learn outside of a traditional school system. So it's all of those, it's major gaps that need to be met, but it's also addressing what's not being addressed within the system. So it's hugely important.
Absolutely. So where do you feel the largest asset pools to facilitate social justice work are?
Well, that's a wonderful question, Sarah. The largest assets. Um, well, there's a few ways you can look at those pools. On the social impact side, you can look at the corporate side. And corporate Canada is playing more and more of a role, especially through ESG, towards supporting charitable causes and not-for-profits. So that would be one clear area. You also have an aging population in Canada.
Right.
And I'm part of that aging population, and it's also, although we're going through some challenges in the economy right now, but it's also one of the wealthiest cohorts in the history of our country. Yet a cohort that also is looking forward and wants to see change and wants to see impact and wants their giving to have a legacy. You can also look to traditional donors and supporters of the charitable sector. So you can look at foundations, you can look at religious organizations. And again, social change and social impact and social justice, maybe I should just say social justice, is so relevant these days that we're seeing more and more investments. And we'd like to see that continue and to grow. But we clearly have to keep making that case for support for that alignment of values and priorities. And Canada is doing quite well in that respect. And I think we can play a leadership role in the world in terms of demonstrating pathways to achieve change. So, and I think philanthropy and charitable organizations have a very important role to play in all of that.
What is your perspective on the different asset classes that can be used, such as real estate in faith communities, to advance social good and social innovation?
Well, real estate as an asset is hugely interesting, especially at a time when we're seeing a shift in the use of real estate. But just from a very simplistic perspective, an individual can donate their home, for example, to a charitable cause. And it's called a charitable remainder trust. They can stay in that home the rest of their lives. They're responsible for the maintenance, for paying the taxes. But when they go on that final journey, that will be a gift to a charitable cause.
Okay.
They will get a charitable tax receipt for the value of that gift while they're alive. So it's a very interesting way, and it can be a very impactful way to leave a legacy. Yeah, many things come to mind when you talk about the use of real estate in creative ways for charitable causes. When you look at assets that are being used less and less by certain groups in society, and those assets become a liability. They have to be maintained, yet they have significant value. So I think we have to be smart as people looking for those opportunities to achieve change, to be smart about how we use them and how we approach different organizations about them.
Yes. So how do you approach the development of capital campaigns?
Well, I've been involved in capital campaigns for quite a while, and just the Reader's Digest version of how to approach it. The first thing is to know what you're raising money for. And a lot of organizations really need to take that time initially to determine what are their key priorities. So that's number one. Number two, do they have a base of donors to move to a capital campaign? Because if you don't have a base of donors and a base of volunteers that have helped you raise money, it's tough to go from zero to that level of fundraising that quickly. Now, if you do, it gets rather interesting. Because most donors, when you go into a capital campaign, if they've been loyal to your organization, they will look at making a more significant gift. Right. Because it is a capital campaign. It's not something that comes every year.
Right.
The only caveat with that is that just to be fair to that donor, you wouldn't go back the following year and ask them for another gift. You would give them a period of at least 3 to 5 years before you would go and look for another gift. Doing a feasibility study, and some people like feasibility studies, some people don't. I compare it to doing market research before you go into business. Would you invest your own money on a business and not having done thorough research in terms of the market, in terms of your product, in terms of pricing, in terms of competitiveness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Through a feasibility study, you come out of that process after doing anywhere from 30 to 40 interviews with your current donors, prospective donors, and prospective volunteers who will be on your campaign cabinet. You have a really good sense of how much money you can raise, who will support you in raising that money, what your campaign goal should be, and how your fundraising priorities have resonated with potential donors. And that brings me back to the market research. So, let's say André wants to start a business and he wants to start a restaurant. And on his menu, he's got 10 things that he thinks everybody's going to want. And he takes the time to do some due diligence and ask people if they like the things he's got on the menu. And they come back and they say, well, André, out of those 10 things, we only really like, these 3 or 4. Right. We wouldn't buy those other things. So, and I've seen many scenarios of capital campaigns where an organization will have a list that internally people think these are great priorities that will resonate with donors. And once they consult, they realize, okay, well, maybe a third of these or half of these are viable. So it saves you a lot of time and effort. Once you've done that, you basically go through a series of phases. And the first phase of a campaign is called the quiet phase. And it's during that phase where you're supposed to quietly raise between 70 and 75% of your goal. And the reason why you do that during the quiet phase is that you really don't want to put the organization's name and its brand in jeopardy in any way by going out and announcing, well, we're having a capital campaign and there's a $10 million goal and we've started to raise money. Right. You're much wiser to wait 2 years down the road when you have 7.5 of that 10 already in the bank, and then you publicly launch your capital campaign. Okay. The people that are going to help you raise that money are your campaign cabinet. And a lot of people think that it's the fundraiser themselves that makes most of the asks. But in reality, it's volunteers that sit on a campaign cabinet. Right. And those individuals normally have the capacity to give, have a network of people that share their interest in giving. And in some cases, they are people that have broad networks and are strong influencers. They may be less inclined towards making direct asks, but they'll be very effective in connecting you.
Right.
The next phase of the campaign is the public phase. That's when you'll announce publicly your campaign, your goal. You'll start to have a number of events to celebrate the gifts that have already successfully come in. And then you'll have a wrap-up phase at the end where you're going to do a final large event to thank all the donors, all of your volunteers, etc. And before you get into any of those phases is the feasibility, that planning phase at the very beginning. So in a nutshell, that's a capital campaign.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you for that overview. So how do you feel about the future of fundraising in Canada?
I feel, wow. I feel good about it, simply because of the people I've had the good pleasure to meet and that have made transformational gifts to organizations to impact change. And I'm, it's not a line. I've been fortunate to be, on the end of the phone when people call and say, I'm making that donation, or I've seen the gifts that have come in from, individuals and families that weren't the $1 million gifts, but every year at Christmas, they would give $50 or $75. And they've been doing that for years. And, I would pick up the phone and call them and thank them. And so, although the statistics show that fundraising is changing in Canada, it's more larger gifts and it's more driven by capital campaigns rather than individual giving. And that statistically is a reality. But a lot has changed in the lives of Canadians in just the past few years. So let's give ourselves time to catch our breaths and get caught up and look at what the future holds. And I think, well, I have a lot of faith in I'm going to sound like an old guy, in the younger generation. My daughter's 8 years old, and she sees what needs to be changed in the world, and she tells me about it every day. Right. And so I have faith that her generation and generations in between will be there to support charities in Canada.
Absolutely. So do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action?
Well, my only call to action would be for anybody that's listening to this interview that hasn't looked at fundraising yet, to really do your homework, do your due diligence, but also don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call different organizations that may have resources that can help you. Look through your own network for people who have been involved in fundraising, whether as a fundraising professional or have been on cabinets, have been involved in local community organizations. And also, don't be afraid to partner. Sometimes smaller organizations will say, well, we're just, we're the little guys. Well, yeah, but you're one of many, many smaller organizations that if you get together and you collaborate as a collective, even as a cooperative, you can do a lot more together. You can really leverage your costs and accomplish a lot more. So those are my thoughts.
Great. So we appreciate your time and remarkable leadership, André. And as we close, we'll close the same way we began this interview, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We also acknowledge our ancestors, and we acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all of the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Have a wonderful day.
You too.